Good afternoon, everyone, to this webinar, the PEDRR webinar on nature-based solutions for enhanced humanitarian action. What are the next steps? Let's await a bit till everyone gets really logged in, because we see that several people are trying to access still. So let's hold on a couple of seconds or a minute. Everyone settled in. But we're about to start in like 1 minute. Yeah, it's good to see that still people are coming in. So let's allow some time for that. Okay, excellent. Good afternoon, everyone. It's time to start this PEDRR webinar series 2020 with the webinar on nature-based solutions for enhanced humanitarian action. What are the next steps? So a warm welcome to all of you. It's quite unusual times at the moment, with probably a lot of people working virtually with the coronavirus affecting the world's economy and the world's overall. But it's also quite an exceptional day today, actually, since yesterday marked the first lustrum of the Sendai Framework on Disaster Risk Reduction, making the 5-year celebration of this important Sendai Framework. And actually, the Sendai Framework for Disaster Risk Reduction saw nature-based solutions more firmly included in the international framework. Since 2015, the attention for ecosystem-based approaches has been increasing. Hence, this webinar is taking place at a very right moment. This webinar builds on the outcomes from the recent Humanitarian Networks and Partnerships Week, which took place in Geneva last year. This webinar will be an interactive webinar. We will have 3 short presentations followed by a panel discussion. We ask your participation during the webinar through some poll questions. And also during the webinar, you will have a possibility to ask questions to the panelists and the presenters to be replied to during the panel discussion in the end. You can ask those questions at any moment, but you can only ask the questions in written format. And you can use the questions option for that. And in doing so, please mention who the question is addressed to make replying to the questions more easily. In general, I mean, the 3 short presentations will focus broadly on some key messages from the Humanitarian Network and Partnerships Week. Secondly, followed by some concrete examples on how nature-based solutions can play a role in different phases of the humanitarian response. And thirdly, to look at a global nature-based solution standards and explore the elements within that standard and how they can be applied. Before going further, let's first see who we have in this virtual room today in the webinar. And that's also directly a way to test the interactiveness of this webinar. So we have a couple of questions for all of you to reply to. And the first one will be screened now. Yes, there it is. So please reply to this one to see what kind of age groups we have in the room. And we need to be a bit of in a disaster quick mode, so we won't give much time for this. But let's assume you all find the button already. And now let's see if we can show some results. So what we see is we don't have any real youth below 20 years in the room, and most of us, the largest category is between 30, 40 years old, with 20, 30 and 40, 50 years old almost equal, and the 50+ years group making up 15% of the group. That's an interesting finding. Then the second poll question and it's good to see that things are working, is in what field do you work? Please select all the options that apply. And indeed, well, so with having several clicks here, let's give another 5 seconds and then see where that brings us. Thank you. So 2/3 of us are working in the field of environment, at least. Also, a close 2/3 working on disaster risk reduction, climate change. We do see that roughly 1/3 is working on humanitarian fields, and equally or slightly higher, 1/3 is working on developments. We see also 11% an other category. I don't know if we can show results of that. I don't think so on what the others are, but let's explore that maybe through chat. If you have very interesting ones, you can put those in the chat as well, and we'll mention those. The next poll question is actually which type of organization do you represent? So please select the ones that apply to you. And let's see what the result of this one is. So not surprisingly, we see that the largest group, 2/3, is from the civil society organization, NGOs. Also, 1/3 is from academia or teaching research, 7% from government level, and 6% from private sector. And again, another category which is not further specified. I do think we have one more poll question to show. What is your level of knowledge on nature-based solutions, which will provide us some ground level knowledge on participants. So let's take some 5 seconds for this one. Okay, thank you. So we see that we have actually quite a good knowledge amongst our participants, like 38% rating themselves good, 34% fair knowledge, some basic knowledge, like 1/5 of the group, and even some true experts here, and some people for which nature-based solutions may be quite a new team. So great to have you all on board. I do think this was the last poll question, so it's actually very good to see that this interactive element is working, and we will use that during the free presentations and the panel discussion afterwards as well. So this webinar entitled Nature-Based Solutions for Enhanced Humanitarian Response. And it is organized by the PEDRR network, and let me show you in some words, and I hope I did now share my screen. Sorry, I should show screen. Yes, there we go. So it's organized by the PEDRR network. And what is this? What is the, oh, sorry. Yeah, what is the partnership? What is the PEDRR network? It's the Partnership for Environment and Disaster Risk Reduction. And as you can see, it has been established in 2011. And it is the, sorry, I'm just struggling a bit with, yes, there we go. It has been established in, 2008. And it is the Partnership for Environment and Disaster Risk Reduction. And it is a global alliance of UN agencies, NGOs, and specialist organizations. The vision is resilient communities as a result of improved management for disaster risk reduction and climate change adaptation. Within that vision, the whole objective of the network is to bring expertise together, to pool expertise and advocate for policy change and practice in ecosystem management for DRR and CCA, so disaster resolution and climate change adaptation, based on science, but also based on practitioners' experiences. So really bringing the expert and practice world together. As you can see, there are many partners, assets from the UN, NGO, and science world, where you see the complete list of logos of members listed here, which you can also find back on the PEDRR network. So PEDRR is promoting the role of ecosystems in DRR and CCA. And we do that by focusing on 3 priorities areas of work. One is advancing science and knowledge. The second one is strengthening the capacities for implementation and upscaling in the field at the community level. And the third one is based on those 2 streams as well, to do policy advocacy and mainstreaming of ecosystems in DRR and CCA. That's in real short the PEDRR network. You can find more information on the PEDRR network website, where you can also register yourself to the newsletter of PEDRR, and you can contact PEDRR as well in case of specific questions. So that was shortly on PEDRR. Before, didn't I do this right? Yes, I did switch to the opening remarks question. Excellent. So assets, this webinar made possible by PEDRR, and it's entitled Nature-Based Solution for Enhanced Humanitarian Action. What are the next steps? The whole purpose of this webinar is to explore how nature-based solutions has the potential to assist in humanitarian action by supporting livelihoods of communities. Nature-based solutions offer a no-regret long-term solutions. By addressing environmental issues and reducing climate-specific and human-driven impacts of disaster response, that has become they have become of increased importance within the humanitarian aid sector, as we will see during the different presentations as well. While saving lives is and must remain the top priority of any emergency operation, the humanitarian sector must take action to minimize and mitigate adverse environmental impacts of its action, for example, through do no harm. Well, by trying to put the context of this webinar in place and to shortly introduce this webinar by some opening phrases, actually pictures say much more than words. So let's have a short look at a short movie from the Philippines showing how nature-based solutions in humanitarian actions can work. It shows some pictures from the recovery phase, a short video from the recovery phase after Cyclone Haiyan. And where is my, oh here. So I'll put the video on and hope that that is.
Mangroves provide natural protection because they prevent waves from smothering your settlements. But we started destroying the natural protection and turned them into fish ponds. And we also started building seawalls. And around 80 to 90% of our mangrove forests were gone. Mangrove restoration is a way of bringing us back to our natural protection. Nature provides a solution. Why find other solutions elsewhere?
Yung simula pa lang, malaking alon.
Tapos pag kuan tigdaman dumako ang tubig, di na kami tong kalista nga sumaka na kami nga tuon may atop.
Diyan muna sila nagsitago. Ngayon, inaangat ang hangin ng Muntikap.
wala na, tapos nagiwalay na kami ng mga anak ko.
Benefits from mangroves, if immediately felt by the local community, will enable them to support your restoration efforts.
This community were given training about the importance of mangroves.
We were able to plant 50,000 mangrove seedlings, and we are supplying local government units and also other NGOs who do mangrove rehabilitation projects in the region.
Nga nakapananom na kami kay hadto waray man iton hiya alaga didahan pagtanamhan mga mangrove. Yan na amo ton baga nabag-o na hiya.
Dako na nin baguhan ito naton barangay tungod nga bumalik na mga isda, shellfish. Sana tungod ang pag-abri ni nga aton Eco Park maka-income heran dako.
Yun lang ang sa kanila. Yung iba kay kukuha rito, puputol. Yun. Yun talaga nga, madidipikto tayo.
Our biggest success is being able to convince some of the local governments to include natural resource management in their plan and preparations. Mangrove restoration takes some time, but you see with PFR, we don't always start from scratch. We have good practice from all over and can learn from success stories elsewhere. And that is where the importance of an alliance like PFR comes in.
Kay ako magtanom nga ni ako bisan ano nga kuan. Akong tiya giningin na kana nga tumubo ka, magmaupait imo turok. May buhay gapitira kay ako baga kung baga may makita ha ako nga sige takpaginakan masing lurong-lurong na good inin film mo nga imaupait iya tubo nga baga tiyahin tawo nga imo ginaalagaan.
Yes, this video clearly showed some of the community members who definitely this nature-based solutions in humanitarian action is very relevant for, and for which we really do this for, and for which we also want to promote this approach through this webinar. But as you also saw, I mean, in the end, I mean, mangrove restoration, a great way in some instances to allow for these nature-based solutions, but it should be really context specific, and each context you have to judge whether this is the right approach, yes or no. And more information can be found in this publication on to plant, not to plants. But what the video really showed is this importance of community participation. You also saw in the end all the different stakeholders involved, which shows local government units, private sector involvement. So the different sectors who are getting behind this nature-based solutions approach. And let's share practices and good practices on this approach through webinars like this. Let me then go to introducing the first speaker in this webinar, which is Charlotte Benedek. She is the head of the Joint Environmental Unit at UNEP and OCHA, located in Geneva. And she has been working with OCHA for the past 15 years, carrying out many functions within the organization, in policy, in private sector engagement, as well as in response, preparedness, and disaster risk reduction. Before joining OCHA, Charlotte worked for 4 years with the UN in Bangkok in Thailand. Before we get to your presentation, Charlotte, we had one poll question for the audience. So let's bring that one on. And then in an emergency situation, we have to choose between either focusing on saving lives or saving trees. Do you agree? Please select one of the below options. Strongly agree, somewhat agree, neither not agree nor disagree, until strongly disagree. We will show the poll questions before the presentation at the end during the panel discussion. So please select your reply, and then Charlotte, please, over to you.
Thank you. I believe I need, yes. Hopefully now you'll all see my screen. So thank you for this, and thank you for inviting me to be part of this panel. I will, in the coming 10 minutes or so, briefly present the Joint Environment Unit, as some of you may not know us. I will speak to the HNPW, Humanitarian Networks and Partnerships Week, which indeed took place in February here in Geneva, and which this year actually had quite a big focus on climate change and the environment. I will particularly mention one of the sessions which focused on nature-based solution. Sorry, I had a message on my screen. And finally, I'll talk a little bit about one of our tools in the unit that is relevant to this topic. So we all know that practically addressing environmental issues in humanitarian action can contribute to reversing those unsustainable trends leading to deforestation, desertification, soil erosion, and pollution, all of which has a significant impact on community resilience, biodiversity, food security, economic development, as well as peace and stability. In the Joint Environment Unit, we work at the interface of the environment and emergencies, and we liaise closely with both humanitarian and environmental actors to strengthen sustainability of humanitarian response. We are a partnership of OCHA and UNEP, and we combine the mandates of those two organizations. OCHA's mandate, for those who don't know, is to mobilize and coordinate effective and principled humanitarian action in partnership with national and international actors in disasters and emergencies. UNEP's mission is to provide leadership and encourage partnerships in caring for the environment by inspiring, informing, and enabling nations and people to improve their quality of life without compromising that of future generations. So in the unit, we mobilize and coordinate emergency assistance to countries which are affected either by standalone environmental emergencies or by natural disasters with significant environmental impact. And we do that as part of the suite of services that OCHA provides to member states upon their request. We are a rapid deployment mechanism, and we typically deploy to affected countries with these other teams that OCHA has within 48 to 72 hours of such a request. And we typically stay for 3 to 4 weeks as a rapid response mechanism, and then we can hand over to our partners in the UN Environment Program or other partners for the longer term assistance to those countries. In addition to these rapid response services, and also partly why we're here today, is that we also work in support of sustainable humanitarian action. I will come back to some of the things that we do in this area later in my presentation. I will let you read the screen rather than repeat. So, to the HNPW, this is something that we have done now for 6 years. So this was the 6th week. It was held here in Geneva in the beginning of February. We had 2,300 participants from 100 member states, 450 organizations, both in our community and also from the private sector and academia. This is an event that OCHA is organizing. It's hosted by the Swiss government, and it's a flagship event of something called the Leading Edge program. This is a collaborative platform for expert networks and partnerships within the humanitarian context to meet and address and develop sustainable solutions to cross-cutting issues in emergency preparedness response. In the middle of that week, we have something called the Internetwork Day, where we discuss cross-cutting issues. This year, there were 5 priority topics: humanitarian coordination and localization, anticipatory action, nexus environment, accountability to affected population, and one that we are concerned with today, the climate crisis. Climate crisis topic was addressed in 3 main sessions during this Internetwork Day. It focused on different frameworks and approaches to address climate change risk in humanitarian action. In the first session, participants engaged with current humanitarian tools, looking at how technology, data, digital innovation, etc., is supporting climate resilient humanitarian action. The second session, which I'll talk more to in a minute, focused on the need for nature-based solutions in humanitarian context and exploring how we could strengthen collaboration between environmental and humanitarian actors in this regard. The final session of that day was a practical workshop on extreme weather events and climate security. During the nature-based solutions session, the agenda covered 3 main areas: people and nature for a better response, an interactive diagnosis beyond the silos, and finally, building an aspirational vision together. And you'll see the privilege of the speakers that we had on there shown screen. Outcomes of this session were the following. Participants agreed on a roadmap to promote transition to more sustainable management of local ecosystem and natural resources in humanitarian hotspots. We identified the need for partnerships to implement nature-based solutions in humanitarian context and linking this to existing initiatives such as the PEDRR. Participants also came to a shared understanding of the necessity and the opportunity of inclusion of ecosystems management practices in their work, and agreed to promote towards a more sustainable humanitarian response. On your screen now, basically, this is a recap on the outcome as to what we could do as next step. This webinar is one of the next steps, actually, and we are looking forward to see how we could actually take these together in the future and work together on these. If any of you have ideas and suggestions, I would suggest that we keep this in mind for the rest of the presentations, and then we can look forward to discussing this in the Q&A session or discussion session that comes after. As I said in the beginning, I also wanted to touch a little bit on a tool that we have to develop together with partners. So you can see that up on your screen. This is a tool called the NEAT Plus. It has a logical connection to nature-based solution, because in order to actually be able to successfully implement those solutions to enhance humanitarian action, it is essential to get an accurate picture of the challenges that we're facing in the particular community or region or setting that we as humanitarians are operating. The NEAT Plus is a simple project-level screening tool for humanitarian context. It's meant to be used by humanitarians with maybe little or moderate environmental expertise. It combines environmental data with site-specific, activity-based questions, and then it automatically analyzes and flags priority environmental risks, as well as suggesting mitigation measures for these identified issues. As I said, it's specifically tailored for humanitarian actors, field staff, community members, and team leaders. Relating to the question, the poll question in the beginning on saving trees or lives, the need is intended to be used after life-saving needs have been met, but immediately following a crisis and prior to project designs, or during a major change in humanitarian setting, an expansion of a camp or development of new livelihood support program, etc. I'm going to touch on two field tests and projects that we've done with the need. The first one was in Myanmar, or the first one that I'll touch on last. In collaboration with the Norwegian Refugee Council, we did a scope mission in Myanmar in October last year. We looked at an IDP settlement in the Kayan state, where we have approximately 5,600 IDPs displaced due to conflict, but also due to environmental issues like riverbank erosion. The key findings of this mission was the need to prioritize DRR interventions and education. In particular, issues of soil erosion and flooding was identified in this assessment, and they require a cross-sectoral Eco-DRR lens in order to mitigate the impact of disasters. And this is where the nature-based solutions then come in as a way to, in the case of this community, improve resilience and reduce needs by reducing the impacts of bank erosion. A specific application of nature-based solutions that handed on by my fellow students. I also wanted to highlight, as a result of this mission, we in the JU hosted a workshop with key stakeholders of the Myanmar Humanitarian Fund, pushing for widespread basic level of environmental screening in all of their operations and incorporating the use of the need into the guidance for actually receiving our funds. Another example of identifying opportunities for nature-based solutions is the mission that we undertook in Uganda last year. We applied the need and compared two zones of the BDBD refugee settlements, which at the time was the world's second largest camp, highlighted the need to focus on minimizing land degradation and deforestation. These concerns were already prioritized by the government and civil society, but the specific mapping that we did allowed for an opportunity to apply nature-based solution to achieve longer-term stability in the provision of biomass for fuel and preservation of the environment. As these two cases show, the integration of environment into humanitarian action is critical to ensure effectiveness, sustainability, and accountability of action. If we include these environmental considerations during the early phases of emergency response, it strengthens livelihood, fosters resilience, and reduces the risk of cascading impacts. So here I just wanted to point you to the Environment and Humanitarian Action Network, which is a unique platform that we have the privilege to be the Secretariat of. It has over 150 experts, it has 8 formal members, and it works together on advancing policy markers, tools, and guidance. It's an open platform, and we welcome all of you who are interested, not already part of this network, to please join us. To help us in the work of the environment and humanitarian action, we have created the IHA Connect, which is a digital tool spanning the humanitarian environment nexus. It is a fairly comprehensive online repository of tools and guidance. It's designed to meet the needs of humanitarian and environmental actors. Please do use the platform. We believe that it's easily searchable and accessible wherever you are, if you're in the field or in the office or in the field. The IHA connects and aligns to the humanitarian program cycle, which is a set of coordinated actions that we use to prepare, manage, and deliver humanitarian response. And you will see that the content goes into 2 sections: preparedness and crisis response. These are 2 of the resources that you can find on the IHA Connect. I won't read it to you, but you can see that there's the Nature Conservancy and the World Agroforestry. Linking back to Myanmar, the Coastal Resilience Program, even though it's different from riverbank erosion, might actually be an avenue that we could explore. And linking back to Uganda, the comprehensive tree-based intervention may indeed reduce social tension in BDBD. I am going to close my presentation now, and I just wanted to point you to some other tools that we actually have in the unit, some of them linking more to the emergency response part of our work, such as disaster waste management guidelines, flash environmental assessment tools, rapid impact assessment, etc. If you look down on your screen in the bottom, you will see where you can find these tools. It's the Environmental Emergency Center. It's an online tool as well, and you can find these 2 resources and many more resources and tool on that. So I would encourage all of you to go and have a look at it. With that, I'm done, and I would like to thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Charlotte, for that inspiring presentation and the attempt to summarize this wealth of information in 14 minutes. So well done. Thank you for that. I mean, you explained you started from the Humanitarian Networks and Partnership Week, February this year, increased attention for nature-based solutions, pointing to a roadmap, partnerships that are being established, the NEAT or NEAT tool, the Nexus Environmental Assessment Tool, and talking about this environmental and humanitarian action network, which you are being the secretary of, with also concrete examples of Myanmar and Uganda BDBD. Thanks for that. In case I don't see any questions yet in the poll, but for participants, feel free to raise any questions during the presentations. And then I would like to move to our next speaker, panelist, which is Bruno Hagebaert. Bruno is the lead of the Risk and Vulnerability Team at the International Federation of the Red Cross and Red Crescent. Prior to this role, he worked as humanitarian coordinator for the Belgian Red Cross in Flanders. And he's an expert on disaster risk reduction, climate change adaptation, and ecosystem management and restoration. That is a short introduction to your presentation. We have a poll question for the participants, which is this one. What are the environmental aspects to consider in emergency response? And you can choose either 1, 2, 3, or 4 replies to this one. And again, we will show the results when we get to the panel discussion. Bruno, over to you for your presentation on nature-based solutions in humanitarian response.
Sorry. Can you see my screen or not yet?
We see it.
Yep. Okay. So my presentation will be on green response and recovery and what it means in practice for the Red Cross and Red Crescent. I think the basis for our work on green response and recovery has been our new IFRC Secretariat environmental policy, which we approved in July 2019. That was the moment when the Red Cross kind of tries to turn more green. And we have like 2 fields where we want to practically apply the environmental approaches in our work. This is first in the programming and then also in our house support services. In the programming and the operations, we try to more systematically include environmental screening. We also have now some people providing technical environmental support during operations. We try to improve our waste management, go for sustainable energy solutions, and definitely also look at the whole supply chain in terms of the material and humanitarian products that we provide in the field, and then see how we can make them more environmentally sustainable, as well as our fleet management. In terms of our house support services, we're trying to look at how our facilities, how our buildings can be more green in terms of the use of energy, water, and waste, limit the number of publications, and also limit the external meetings and travel by promoting telecommuting. So I think the whole COVID-19 crisis is a very good exercise to apply that more systematically for the coming years. In 2014, there was a working group created of National Red Cross Societies. I think the initiative came from Swedish Red Cross, and IFRC worked together with them to promote a green response approach, which is an approach in emergency response with the ambition to minimize the adverse impact on the environment. We really want to combine the life-saving and the do no harm to people with the do no harm to the nature and the environment. And this is done through the promotion of guidelines, developing of some minimum environmental standards, some technical advice that is given, and some environmental impact assessments. So the whole concept is to combine the life-saving element with the nature-saving and nature protection element in our work. The main environment aspects that we want to promote and consider in emergency response is, the first one is to avoid overexploitation of the natural resources, especially timber and fuel wood. We found out that, for instance, in our Haiti operations after the earthquake, for the design of a transitional shelter, we needed 500 kilogram of wood products, which was enormous. So that already massively contributed to the depletion of the resources in wood in Haiti, which were already in high demand. So we really had to look for alternatives. A second consideration in emergency response was to avoid unplanned habitat change by clearing natural habitats. I mean, we're thinking of trying to avoid that. For instance, on beaches, we massively remove sand or gravel for construction purposes, and then letting these beaches being more exposed to storms and so on. So trying to find alternatives for the habitat change. A logical other one was to minimize the pollution of water. As you can imagine, in a refugee camp, and I think on the right there's an image of a camp in Lesbos, the pollution of water, but also of other material is enormous. So we want to come up with more solid waste water management, but also solid waste management, so to avoid that these conditions become unmanageable and environmentally unsustainable. And then the last approach that we are considering increasingly is to minimize the solid waste pollution. As you can imagine, there's a huge, for instance, use of plastic in packaging and other materials that we use in humanitarian context, and we really try to promote the whole concept of recycling and the use of biodegradable products more than the traditional packaging. But what we also realize is that green response should not just be an afterthought. It should be something that we are prepared for and that we have a proactive approach to. So as we notice that if we have more time to think about how to effectively apply green response, it will also provide us time to work more on greener procurement. So systematically trying to scan our procurement procedures and trying to find out what environmentally friendly approaches we can do. It would also allow for mapping of the environmental hazards in certain locations. It allows also for the training for staff on sphere environmental standards. It allows us in certain crisis situations to get a better understanding of local environmental regulations. And finally, and I think this is a crucial one, which we have experience in different partnerships, to develop relationships between humanitarian organizations and local environmental organizations. It is really important that we partner very closely with them, especially at the local and community level, because they have the knowledge, and we often, as a Red Cross, we have the volunteers and we have the humanitarian skills, but to establish a close working relationship with local environmental organizations is absolutely crucial. An example of an application of the green response was the deployment of an IFRC environmental field advisor in the emergency response operations. So in our teams that we send out during crisis, normally we don't have people with an environmental profile or background, but in Cox's Bazar in Bangladesh, we had somebody who was part of the team and also could influence decision making, or did some studies afterwards as well about how damage to the environment could be limited. And the person came up with some suggestions about together with other organizations about the use of LPG as cooking fuel to avoid the massive deforestation which was taking place. There were also good suggestions to improve the waste management, and he suggested to start working on some community greening and community gardening projects. So this is an approach that we increasingly are now using, not systematically, but when opportunities arise, to have an environmental field advisor in our emergency operations. Besides green response, we also have been for a number of years involved in green recovery. And I think our first engagement really in this field was a collaboration between American Red Cross and the World Wildlife Fund following the 2005 tsunami. And out of that, a whole package of training program was developed, which is quite a robust package with lots of modules, and they're still available online. And some of the key modules are listed in my presentation. In terms of building back greener or green recovery in practice, I think it's a combination of combining the do no harm approach with truly building resilience. So combining somehow the more humanitarian protection approach to a longer, more sustainable development approach. On the do no harm side, the suggestions and the ideas are quite close to what is being done in green response. It's about avoiding overexploitation of natural resources, use more environmentally friendly design standards in the reconstruction, try to minimize the habitat change, as I mentioned, doing proper land use planning, trying to see whether any measures taken during the recovery may have a negative impact on local habitats. Also to prevent the use of invasive alien species, because they may affect the biodiversity. Could be certain tree species, could be certain animal species that we would be introducing, and of course also to avoid water pollution. On the longer term, more building resilience side, we definitely try to combine the reconstruction of livelihoods with the promotion of healthy ecosystems. Mangroves is a typical example of that. We also try to combine this with measures to mitigate and adapt to climate change. And but this is new, also think about how can we, as part of a reconstruction and a restoration, not just think about people's livelihoods, but also systematically try to restore and conserve the natural habitats and the ecosystems in the area that we work. Overall, it's all about aiming for co-benefits whereby livelihood concerns, climate concerns, and ecosystem protection and restoration are being combined into one approach. Then to conclude, we are engaged. For the last few years, we've been very actively engaged in establishing partnerships. I think the oldest partnership was with Partners for Resilience, in which Jeroen is very active, and I was also a founding member of it, a collaboration with the Nature Conservancy. We've signed an MOU with them, and also we've joined the Global Mangrove Alliance. Just very briefly, Partners for Resilience, as many of you may know, is a partnership between the Netherlands Red Cross, the Red Cross Climate Center, CARE, Cordate, Wetlands, and UN Environment. So we're as a Red Cross federation, we're actively engaged and supporting this initiative. A second one, which we are now expanding, is the work that we have done with the Nature Conservancy in the Resilient Islands project in the Caribbean, in Dominican Republic, in Grenada, and in Jamaica. And we are now also moving with their support into new areas in Asia, in Southeast Asia, and in the Pacific. We've also developed a communities adapting with nature checklist. So for local assessments, taking nature into consideration. And we're looking at engaging with TNC in some recovery operations. Normally, TNC is much more involved in longer term sustainable development work, but we're trying to find ways of also getting their engagement in the recovery. And then to close my presentation, we've also joined the Global Mangrove Alliance already. As I remember, more than 10 or 15 years ago, we were very active in Vietnam and Indonesia in using volunteers to plant mangroves, and there's a lot of guiding that, but now we want to kind of revigorate our work, because we think the work around mangroves is one of the most essential approaches related to not only green recovery, but also the longer term environmental work. So I'll stop here. I know that the question and answer session will come afterward, but if you have any questions, please write them into the chat box. Thank you so much, and look forward to an interesting further of this continuation of the session. Thanks so much.
Thank you very much, Bruno. And it's good to know that questions are coming in now, both for Charlotte and for Bruno as well. But thanks for your presentation showing practical examples and a clear strategy of IFRC to work on nature-based solutions in humanitarian action. I mean, ranging from preparedness for green response, you showed toolkits, examples from employing environmental field advisors to Cox's Bazar, Bangladesh, for example, and collaborations with local environmental organizations. One of the questions is on that actually. What are the first steps to do that? But let's address that maybe in the end in the Q&A session. And an interesting overview of combining do no harm with building resilience. Thanks for that. And let's continue to our third panelist, Veronica Ruiz from International Union for Conservation of Nature. Veronica is the Nature-Based Solutions Program Officer at the IUCN Global Ecosystem Management Program, working on showcasing the degradation of ecosystems exacerbates the vulnerability of people and the impact of disasters on populations, as well as advocating and advancing the joint agenda for the implementation of Eco-DRR and EBA, ecosystem-based adaptation. Before we give the floor to Veronica, we have another poll question to get you all linked in again. What challenges can nature-based solutions address? And again, you can choose multiple replies to this one if you wish. Then over to you, Veronica.
Thank you so much for the presentation. Thank you for all the my colleagues Bruno and Charlotte for the presentations as well. I'm quite impressed about the number of participants in the webinar, I have to say. Okay. Can you see my slide? I think so, yes.
Yes, we do.
Okay. So, as you may know, climate is like completely changing. It is a climate breakdown and extreme weather. We are losing a species. It is a problem with water scarcity and also with food production. We have facing also a crisis and really leading to serious problems. But we have to say that also that the combination of these different factors together are driving us and creating sort of, we can say, like the perfect storm, no? However, the response to these emergencies by government, civil society as well, businesses and institutions did not yet clearly recognize what are the linkages in between those factors and nature per se. So, to trying to solve the problems individually without taking into account the cascading impact will be likely to be ineffective. So we need to all come together in order to face all these issues and threats that we are facing so far and to cope with them. And within the scope of the webinar, we should think about but how nature can help in coping with this threat and factor that I just mentioned, and how we can cope with this current situation now, but also in the future. So nature can provide cost-effective, long-term, and no-regret solutions is what we call the nature-based solution, which is a term that is now everywhere. Wherever you go, it doesn't matter if it's an international event or a local event, people are talking about nature-based solutions. In IUCN, we defined the term of nature-based solution in 2016 during our last Congress in Hawaii, World Conservation Congress. And IUCN defines nature-based solutions as actions that protect, sustainable, manage, and restore natural or modified ecosystem, but simultaneously addressing societal challenge and thereby providing human well-being and biodiversity benefits. So far, we consider 6 societal challenges that you will see. We start focusing on climate change, food and water security, human health, socioeconomic development, and disaster risk reduction. But when discussing with colleagues that also work in the environmental sector, but also with colleagues working in other many different sectors, and also with discussion with other, not only face-to-face discussion, but when going to meetings, we realized that we need to focus as well on what is the problem of ecosystem degradation and what drives to biodiversity loss. So this is the 7th societal challenge or societal need that we have just included in our work on nature-based solutions. So I've been saying we are facing all these different challenges. So whether it's whether it's food security, climate change, water security, human health, disaster risk, or economic development, nature can also help us to find a way. But how nature-based solution could be applied in what we are talking in this webinar, how it can be applied in a humanitarian environment scenario. Well, as you all know, in the humanitarian context, actions are more immediate in their response, or because they are responding to emergencies and crises, while nature-based solutions can be considered, or is the point, are usually co-designed and co-created with stakeholders to address societal challenges, but at the longer term. However, given this difference in between these two worlds, there are very good examples that can show that how nature-based solutions can bring together these two sectors. This is the case of the of Cox's Bazar, where colleagues from the IUCN Bangladesh and colleagues from UNHCR has been working now for a while for the Rohingya crisis. So this is the example of the camp number 4 of Kutupalong. This is an extension camp where the environment is also being deteriorated. So the two organizations, they came together and they designed a plan, a long-term plan for bringing back the environment that used to be in there before this crisis. So they developed jointly a forest management plan. And within this forest management plan, we can see like there were 2 main directions. So the first one is developing this forest management plan for reducing disaster risk. What happened by implementing this plan is the soil erosion decrease, which means that the risk of landslides decreases as well. But in the other hand, this plan, within this plan, there were developed different activities for forest and land restoration and protection, which mean that they are bringing back the healthy environment, but not also bringing back the environment, but by doing and implementing this plan, they were putting in place also some agriculture and agroforest crops, which mean that some of the refugees could have sort of like alternative livelihoods, but also the fact of working on these specific activities, they bring them some better well-being and some opportunities as well. But this is a case of another example of a successful relationship between humanitarian and non-humanitarian actors. And you will see this picture of elephants. I think is one of the pictures that is very well known now. We have our colleague Rakib Amil that came all the way from Bangladesh to Geneva in February to present this joint work, and also in the same camp where they are working in this nature and conflict context, while this is a settlement that has been put in place in one of the most, we'll say, most old corridor for Asian elephants. So now both UNHCR and IUCN are working together to put in place some communication strategies and working with the people living in the camp to get less stress because of this conflict in between nature and conflict, let's say. But what are the next steps? I just mentioned this is a case, an example of a project that is working very well, but we are in the situation that I mentioned from the beginning, that we are facing climate crisis, biodiversity crisis, a human crisis, and even an economic crisis. So we are at the point of, we have to move from pilot specific cases and try to bring nature-based solution at a scale. And this can be done by combining nature-based solution with other infrastructure. Even we can combine green infrastructure with build infrastructure. For example, our sea wall for protecting people that are living in the coastline. But also what we need to put NBS at a scale is like we need to invest on nature-based solution also for bringing different sectors together. This is the beauty of nature-based solutions. Nature-based solutions is not just environment. When talking about nature-based solutions, we are talking about bringing together the economic sector, the planning sector, infrastructure sector, the water sector, and also the most important, what we are bringing is the people that are facing those challenges. That is the beauty of nature-based solution, and this should be one of the next steps that has to be reinforced. Also very important is the fact of embedding nature-based solutions across different sectoral policies. This is a way of bringing coherence and aligning different mechanisms. One of the challenges that countries are facing is the fact of spending so much time in reporting for the so many international targets. We have the Aichi target for biodiversity, we have the SDGs, we have the NDCs, we have the Sendai target as well. So nature-based, by creating, designing, and implementing nature-based solutions, we can give a way to countries to report in a single way, in a single time, to all these different targets. And first big step to achieve what just has been saying is the elaboration of the first global standard on nature-based solutions. IUCN just finalized this global standard with the incredible help of the Commission on Ecosystem Management of IUCN as well, and the help as well of more than 1,000 people that have been part of the 2 public consultations that we have put in place. This has been an incredible work, not only from us as IUCN, but also from all the people that have been helping us in achieving this huge milestone for 2020. What we thought that 2020 will be the super year, despite coronavirus. Just to give you an overview about the global standard, this global standard is focusing on 8 main criteria. The first one is the societal challenge. We say this is an overarching criterion where biodiversity is as well included in there. And then we have the design at the scale, at which scale has to nature-based solution be designed. The biodiversity net gain, the economic viability of the measure that we are proposing, the inclusive governance, balance and trade-off, and adaptive management and the sustainability. This standard is developed to be compatible with the ISIL Alliance Code of Good Practice, and it is not I will say not moving document is a document that will be alive, because it's a document that will be updated every 4 years. So every 4 years, it will be changing accordingly to the situation and accordingly to the progress made on nature-based solutions. This within the standard per se, within the document, we can find different, we'll say, different sub-products. We'll have what we call a user-friendly booklet with the 8 criteria and the different associated indicators, including an example for each of them. This is a very visual document. But then we will have what we say the document per se with all the explanation, etc., and a separate background document where the users they could find any scientific grounding, guidance, any means of verification, if you need any tool, any methodology, any framework. So we will have this in a separate document. And I have to say again, thank you so much for all people that were involved in the process, because they have been also the one helping us in filling this background document. And lastly, we will include a self-assessment tool. This will be available. So whenever someone is we like to use the standard, you will have a matter to know, like, at what point the nature-based solution measure that you are suggesting is following a different criteria of the NBS standard. And you will see, for example, in the table that you will see in the left side of your screen, if we check the example in there, you will see that criterion number 4, for example, is not in accordance to the NBS standard, which means that it could help you in a certain way to know where your measure is failing and what could be done better. By saying that, this standard won't be a way of saying, like, we won't be like the policy and say, like, this is a good or a bad nature-based solutions. It will be more a facilitative document that will help you in enhancing or reinforcing some of the criteria. And lastly, a governance structure will be set up for the global standard. It will be set up for oversight, safeguarding, revision, research, and innovation. And this will be composed of an international standard committee and linked to a national regional hubs to support the communities in practice. So we will have different communities in practice in the different countries. And then it will be a relationship really directly connected with what I mentioned, the International Standard Committee. And I have to say that thank to all of you, more than 120 people are online. And thank you also for colleagues from the coordination team of PEDRR to set up this first webinar of 2020.
Thank you very much, Veronica, for your presentation on the IUCN work on the nature-based solutions. You clearly explained that it's a pressing issue and it needs all of us to come together. Highlighted a practical example of Cox's Bazar as well with the forest management plan. And you also mentioned that nature-based solutions is not just about environment, it's about bringing all sectors and people together. And on the global nature-based solution standard that you presented, that's also reflected in the criteria that we see appearing there. And you went into like how to bring this to scale and how to get it more in the mainstream of the work. So thank you very much for that inspiring presentation. And again, there are also several questions popped up which are visible in our presenters chat as well. Let's move to the panel discussion, for which we have more than 20 minutes left. Let's face it positively, 21 minutes. So the panel discussion, but we asked you as participants 3 poll questions during the webinar. So let's first have a look at the replies to those poll questions. The first one was, in an emergency situation, we have to choose between either focusing on saving lives or saving trees. Do you agree? We see at least a quarter of the people strongly disagreeing with making a choice between trees or people, and we see actually roughly more than 10% of the people agreeing on this choosing for focusing on saving of life. So I think the replies show that it's actually really a challenge in humanitarian action what to focus on, and that also the opinions are diverse on this still, and that's reflected in our group here as well. And probably one of the reasons is that there's no clear-cut reply to this question because it's context-specific how to address this. Let's go to the second poll question. What are the environmental aspects to consider in emergency response? Actually, which one is scoring highest? 84% avoid overexploitation of natural resources. And we see that also the others are scoring quite high, which indeed we would agree to, because all 4 replies need to be considered environmental aspects in emergency responses. So thanks for that. The last third poll question was what challenges can nature-based solutions address? And well, clearly, well, let's say disaster risk reduction is scoring highest with 95%, but you clearly see that all replies are scoring really high. And that's indeed the same as the last question. All mentioned challenges can be addressed through nature-based solutions. So thanks for that. That brings us then to the panel discussion, for which we will use the different questions raised along the presentations. Seeing the time, my proposal would be to start with the different panelists replying to one question. So maybe let's start with Charlotta. The question, and now I need to go back to my screen. Yes, right. Here, so maybe the question for Charlotte, for you to answer. One of the questions was, how do you measure social and humanitarian impact of nature-based solutions? And if they change from case to case, what are your success indicators for nature-based solutions and measuring the social and humanitarian impacts? A question relevant in the debate on what are the next steps for nature-based solutions in humanitarian action.
Yes, thank you. Yes, so I think, yes, they differ from case to case, obviously, depending on where we are. One of the things that we are doing, we have a project on climate change adaptation in Chad, Burundi, and Sudan. And we are doing assessment and analysis to actually try and understand how the adaptation solutions that are being implemented, and those are around reforestation, wash, and energy, for example. So we are doing an analysis to see how these measures are actually impacting on the settings. The other thing is that, of course, the needs should also be used to actually mark and measure our progress. So what we would recommend is that we do the needs assessment at the beginning, or at the beginning of a project or a setting up of an operation, and then we actually go back and do the same thing to actually see whether or not the risks are the same, or hopefully they are diminished based on the mitigation measures that we have implemented. Over.
Thank you for that, Charlotte. So explaining like the needs assessment and checking it later on again, as well as referring to some sectors like reforestation, wash, and energy, where it may be more relevant or more clear to show the impacts. Thanks for that. Well, maybe then a question for Bruno.
I can read it if you want to.
Yes, that's also
I reply to it as well. So So I got a question. Hi, Bruno. Thank you for your remarks. What is your biggest challenge in implementing and expanding your work? Which localities have been most supportive of these initiatives and which have been more challenging? I think on the first question about challenge, I think the biggest challenge, and it relates actually to three elements, is the change in mindset that we would require from humanitarian actors. I mean, the first change would be from being people-centered and, as they call it, anthropocentric, to much more ecocentric and seeing the wider systems context in which people function. So the relationship between people and their environment. This is often a challenge for some of our people, also some of the Red Cross volunteers that have been trained very much about saving lives and not necessarily always seeing the wider context. So there's an element of moving from just being people-centered to a wider environmental concern. Then a second element is the localized nature that we normally work in, and it's hard for some of us to think in terms of a wider landscape approach. So seeing certain crises not just in their very local context, but understand that they are part of a dynamic which could be upstream, which could be even far away from the actual location, and that the causes are not necessarily always at the local level. And then the third challenge I see is moving from a short-term life-saving approach to a much more longer-term kind of risk management thinking and sustainable development thinking. This is also seen as not easy to install in people that have been involved very much in the, let's say, short-term disaster management approach. Places that we've seen that are very receptive to it are those which see a threat combined from climate change, maybe their nature depletion, and also their livelihoods being affected. And these are definitely countries like the Caribbean, the Pacific Islands, and some countries in Southeast Asia, where these elements are very much intertwined. And when we start discussing the opportunities for applying nature-based solutions into recovery or into longer term, these countries seem to be very receptive and understanding to apply it. In other places, it's more difficult when these linkages between climate and nature and livelihoods survival are not so obvious, and people don't see necessarily an immediate need to address these. But this would be my answer to the question. Hope this is satisfying.
Thank you very much, Bruno, for that comprehensive reply on the challenges, changing mindsets, wider landscape approaches, and focus on longer-term risk management being challenging, as well as some differences between the localities explained. Thanks for that. Veronica, maybe a question to you. There was reference to like green corridors. So do you think green corridors can help mitigate biodiversity loss and stem the spread of infectious disease between man and animal as a better solution than reforestation and afforestation, as some trees take long to grow? Would that be a question with a possible reply? I think you need to unmute your mic.
Yes. I haven't seen, can you say this one again? Because it's the only one I haven't seen. I have seen only question on economic value on nature-based solutions.
Okay. That's interesting. Oh, yeah, now let me repeat it. So green corridors. Do you think green corridors can help mitigate biodiversity loss and stem the spread of infectious disease between man and animal as a better solution than reforestation?
Do you think green corridors can be better solution to reforestation? Well, I mean, green corridors is an alternative, and we're talking about a spread of infectious diseases between man and animal as a better solution than reforestation. I don't think so that only green corridors. So this is I mean, as I said before, this is a bit of the beauty of nature-based solutions. You cannot come only with a single approach and to be put it in place. In the case of green corridors, I don't know if the person is talking about like just green corridors for biodiversity, or it's a green corridor that you combine the maintenance and protection of the ecosystem and the biodiversity per se, while maintaining as well the water, the forest, and the soil and the land as services that the nature can provide. So this is what we call green corridors. So by maintaining those corridors, you are maintaining all these different services. This is one of the points. And if you are talking about this, then green corridors can be one of the options to avoid the spread of infection diseases in between man and animal. But this is, I think, this is a problem that goes much beyond. And I don't want to talk in terms of environmentalists per se, but I think it's also a problem of the relationship in between society, people, and nature. If we are talking about the problem, like for example with coronavirus, we can see that it was a problem due to wildlife illegal traffic of a species. So this is going much beyond. And then from the green corridor, you have to think about also, if you want to keep a green corridor, you have to see if the corridors is highly degraded or not. So then you will need to come up with another different approach to be combined, which could be reforestation or restoration of the corridor.
Thank you very much, Veronica, for aiming to reply to that question, also highlighting the complexity within that. We're having 8 minutes left, so I'm actually thinking, since the presenters also saw the different questions posed, it may be good if we just give each of you the time to either give like a closing statement or remark, or reply to one more question which was highlighted. Can we do that? And can I start with you, Charlotta?
Sure, thank you. Yes, so I will respond to. There were 4 questions, I think, that I could see. So the one on impact we spoke about. There was a question on whether the NEAT has been used in conflict settings, and yes, it's used in protracted crisis. We also recently tested it on the refugee reception center in Venezuela, or at the Colombian border. So yes, there was a question on timing on that as well. I would say immediately after life-saving, but prior to setting up bigger operations. There was a question on joining the EHA, which was something that I said would welcome everyone. No, you do not need to be invited. Please send us an email at the backup. We can probably post it later on, but at the ocha.unep@un.org, or to me, my family name @un.org, and we will make sure that you will be registered. There was also finally a question on the opportunity mapping. I would suggest that we get back. I didn't see who asked that question. This is something that's been done with UNEP Grid using spatial data. And I'd be happy to go over that more in detail with the person who asked that question, or whoever is interested. Again, we can get back to you on that. So I will hand over to my analyst, and thank you so much for being part of this webinar.
Yeah, thank you very much, Charlotte, for those clear replies to indeed several of the questions that were highlighted here. Thanks for that. Bruno, maybe over to you.
Okay, I only got 2 questions, so I will check. The other one I received is you mentioned proactive action to build resilience. How long does it usually take to engage local partners to develop activities? What is your entry point, and who finances green response and the work IFRC does? So lots of questions into these questions. I think I can also partly refer to in terms of time, the time question. It really depends on the need for mindset change amongst. I mean, if I just apply to the Red Cross volunteers and the Red Cross organizations, it needs some time to install this eco-awareness, as we call it, or eco-smartness into their work, because often they not necessarily seeing the direct connection between nature protection and life-saving activities. But once they're able to do it, I think it can go quite quickly. I think in our case, it would really need to work on different fronts. We would need to work on the senior management and the leadership of the organization, and then have it somehow translated into strategies and policies, and then that would influence then the practice at the local level. But once that is being understood, and I clearly see that, like, young youth volunteers are very sensitive to green solutions and nature-based solutions, we can move quite quickly to develop activities. But it needs some kind of institutional awareness raising first. What is your entry point? I think definitely trying to explain that nature does play a major role in creating people's vulnerability if not properly taken care of. So if you do not incorporate nature-based solutions into your humanitarian work, you're probably going to sustain the need for humanitarian interventions, and there's definitely need to work on both fronts. Otherwise, you're just continuously in a humanitarian mood, and you will not address some of the root causes. Then who finances green response and the work IFRC does in this regard? I presume the main donors have been some Scandinavian countries who have shown interest in this topic, and now I think we feel like increasingly there's also other countries that and other donors that have shown interest. I think for our work and for the DR work within the Red Cross, this is definitely a way forward, and I'm sure we will continue to expand this work. So I'm very happy to be part of this PEDRR panel, and hopefully in a few more years we'll be able to come up with lot more practical experiences in applying NBS in our work.
Thank you very much, Bruno, for also clear, short replies to the many questions raised in that one question. There was one other question a bit more down on how do you change this mindset that you were referring to, but I think you touched upon that as well, like both institutional as well as referring to some of the youth as change agents as well. So
yes, I did. Yeah. Okay. I want to give the floor also to Veronica so she can.
Yes. Thank you for that, Bruno. So Veronica, there were a couple of more questions.
Yeah, I saw there were questions on how do you engage stakeholders on the economic value of ecosystem services so they participate in the care and protection. Nature-based solutions often take time for benefits to be realized. How do you communicate its value to hosts with economic and safety needs right away? What are interim solutions, interesting, in place until nature-based solutions can eventually have its direct impact? Well, so basically, and it's something that I forgot during my presentation, the fact of setting up this NBS standard is a way also to have everybody on the same page, because nature-based solutions is a terminology that is being used and misused right now. So this standard will be very helpful in terms of like trying to, to have everybody the same understanding, especially to avoiding any type of greenwashing. So for what I'm mentioning in terms of economic, we have worked with the economists. We have in IUCN, we have an economic unit. They have been working directly with us to set up this criterion specific on economics. And also we have been working with the private sector to know what are the type of indicators that we can include in there. I cannot share much further because the standard will be publicly published in June during the Congress. in Marseille, the World Conservation Congress. But so far we have 4 specific indicators for economic. One of them is, for example, in terms of, I will read literally, a cost effectiveness study is provided to support the choice of nature-based solution, including the likely impact of any relevant regulation and subside. We also have related to the MBS design, considers the portfolio of resourcing options such as market-based, public sector, voluntary commitment, and actions to support regulatory compliance. So just to let you know, these are the indicators, and within the indicators, they will have some different type of guidance. And the guidance can be used according to the different scenarios where the nature-based solution will be designed, and depending on the societal challenge. And the way of how we communicate, this is also, this is why we have this standard, no? And this is also, again, the beauty of nature-based solutions is the fact of convening actors from different sectors and to sit all together to address a common problem. So this is the way we do. The way we communicate is to sit with people, explain what is happening, and being, the most important, being very transparent about the processes. Especially because we are talking here about economic indicators.
Thank you very much, Veronica, for trying to give clear replies to the many questions raised. And I think that sheds greatly the light on most of the questions. So thanks for that. I see some of the participants are leaving already, since we let me, before finishing and closing down, say, first of all, thank you very much for all the participants joining in this webinar, because indeed it was a great number that showed up. Great to have this group online and showing your interest, also with very valid and good questions to the panelists. Thank you very much for PEDRR for hosting and organizing and facilitating this webinar on nature-based solutions for enhanced humanitarian actions. What are the next steps? So it's a bit impossible to summarize everything what has been said so far, but there will be a sharing of the materials and discussions from this webinar. And I think as a summary statement, I mean, as expressed by the different panelists, all of them, it's great to have people on board linked to these discussions of nature-based solutions in humanitarian action. It is clearly a topic gaining interest. It is clearly a topic on which more dialogue and discussion is needed, more people to engage in this discussion and dialogue and approach. So all participants are invited to follow the developments through the different initiatives mentioned. Sign up to newsletters of the organizations involved, including the PEDRR newsletter, as well as join the different networks, as mentioned, the EA networks and others, and definitely to continue making the case for nature-based solutions in humanitarian action, and to continue putting this topic on the agenda in different forms, either virtual, which we are kind of forced to in the coming periods, or in face-to-face meetings at global, local, national level, and to really engage some of the local expertise in the work, combining with the global and evidence-based work which is around there at the different levels. But thank you very much all for this. And indeed, nature-based solutions in humanitarian actions, one of the questions was, can they save lives? Yes, indeed. I think we saw great examples in this webinar that they can save lives, both in a direct way and in indirect ways. The direct ways, I mean the mangrove protecting communities from storm, the indirect ways of enhancing the ecosystems around on which people depend for their livelihoods, and in that sense making their lives more resilient and yeah, better able to survive. So with those words, reflecting back on the community members we saw at the beginning of the webinar, once thanking you all for your participation, attendance, and a special thanks to the panelists for their great contributions and collaboration in this effort. Thanks all, and see you again in the next webinar.
Thank you, Jeroen.
Thank
Thank
you.
you, everybody.
Bye.